faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally from Talking Books. Today, I'm introducing Frederic Wakeman's The Great Enterprise. In the previous episode on the founding history of the Qing Dynasty, I covered the Qing army capturing Beijing and pacifying the north. Now, let me talk about how the Qing army pacified its enemies in the south. First, let's take a look together at who exactly the Qing army's enemies were. The Qing dynasty's enemies in the south were precisely the remnants of the Ming dynasty forces. Actually, at the end of the Chang'an era, before Li Zicheng attacked Beijing, some ministers proposed abandoning Beijing to move south to Nanjing, but Chang'an rejected this plan. However, the Nanjing administrative team was already preparing to establish a new government in case of emergencies. By 1644, Beijing was breached. Shangzhen also hanged himself. A group of senior officials, led by Nanjing's Minister of War Shi Kefa, immediately called for a nationwide uprising. These officials quickly began efforts to rebuild the Ming dynasty. On one hand, they sent envoys to the Wai River Basin to contact local warlords in Jianbei and win over their private armies. On the other hand, they tried to defend against Li Zichen's forces. A group of Ming generals in the southern Ming. They commanded powerful armies. The most important were four generals: Liu Zixing, Huang Degong, Liu Liangzuo, and Gao Ji. Each led tens of thousands of troops with lax discipline. So local officials in Jiangnan disliked them. Some, like Liu Zhanfei, the governor of Huai'an, a strategic canal town, organized nearby areas to train troops. He did this both to resist Li Zicheng's forces from entering cities and to guard against those four generals seizing Yangzhou. Of course, the chaos in the southern Ming didn't end there. While officials in Nanjing were reorganizing the army, the southern Ming court erupted into a battle for the throne. At that time, Zhu Xilong, the crown prince of Emperor Chongzhen, went missing in the war, leaving contenders with strength to compete. The two Ming princes competing for the throne were Prince Fu Zhu Yusung and Prince Lu Zhu Changfeng. Prince Fu had poor character and abilities, but he was closer in bloodline to the royal family, being the grandson of Emperor Wanli. Prince Lu had better character but was more distantly related. Over the throne issue, court officials split into two factions. Prince Fu gained support from powerful military generals and, with the maneuvering of influential minister Ma Shiying, ultimately ascended to the throne. This is Emperor Hongguang's military disarray and political struggles in court. The southern Ming court was fraught with crises from the start. Militarily, Emperor Hongguang completely ignored the Qing threat to the southern Ming. He dispatched his loyal generals, Lu Ziqing, Gao Ji, and others, to four key cities, planning to march north and reclaim territories occupied by Li Zicheng. But the court couldn't provide enough military pay. The generals in the field had independent financial and military powers. They became too big to control and couldn't be mobilized. If it were just about controlling the soldiers, it might be manageable. Politically, the court wasn't peaceful either. The old Ming trick of factional strife quickly resurfaced in the small court. The Donglin faction and the Fuxi members began jointly attacking the powerful minister. Didn't Ma Shiying mention this before? Ma Shiying had merit in supporting Prince Fu to the throne, but he had some remnants of Wei Zhongshan's faction around him. According to Emperor Chengzhan's edict, these people shouldn't reappear in politics. Yet in the southern Ming court, they gained significant influence. At that time, the Qinglu faction and Wei Zhongshan's eunuch faction had deep-seated hatred for each other. So they wrote articles, posted notices, and stirred up public opinion, hoping to undermine Ma Shiying. In this way, it also shook Emperor Hongguang's legitimacy. After all this talk, everyone might have forgotten what was the small court established for in the first place. Right, it was for the northern expedition to reclaim lost territories. Well, a silver lining in the misfortune is that Shi Kefa, guarding Yangzhou, might be the only one still thinking about this matter. Shi Kefa was a man of both literary and military talents, incorruptible as an official, and held very high prestige in the southern Ming court. As the governor of military affairs in Zhanbei, he attracted many talents who gathered in Yangzhou. But how exactly to carry out the northern expedition? Who exactly is the target of the northern expedition? Is it the remnants of Li Zicheng or the Manchus who entered Beijing? Before Shi Kefa could take any action, the Qing Dynasty seized the initiative with a preemptive move. 1644. In July, Dorgon issued a proclamation to the people of Jiangnan. In the document, he expressed goodwill. Besides urging and hinting at officials and commoners to surrender, he also proposed peaceful coexistence with the southern Ming where possible. After reading the proclamation, the southern Ming court began considering recognizing the Qing regime as an equal, no longer viewing them as enemies that must be eliminated. After all, the dynasty had collapsed. The Ming peasant armies posed a greater threat than the Jurchen armies from the northeast and might also be easier to deal with. So, with Shi Kefa's approval, the southern Ming sent envoys north for negotiations. Their strategy was to bypass direct talks with the Qing dynasty, instead trying to persuade Wu Sangui to return to the southern Ming to jointly resist peasant armies, while offering territorial concessions to convince the Qing army to retreat beyond the Shanhai Pass. Meanwhile, they prepared defenses in Shangqiu and Suzhou along the Yellow River. As a precaution, the outcome of the negotiations was predictable. Wu Sangui, after all, was no fool. He refused any noble titles from the southern Ming regime, and the envoy Zhuo Maodi was executed. The deputy envoy Chen Hongfan, who was actually a Qing spy, was released back to Nanjing. In November 1644, the Qing army gathered forces and advanced south through Shandong and Henan in two routes, launching their attack. Since the Qing were everyone's enemy, they had to simultaneously confront southern Ming troops, peasant armies, and local warlords. On this extended front, their advance became extremely difficult. But just then, internal strife erupted within the southern Ming regime, giving the Qing a perfect opportunity. As mentioned earlier, southern Ming armies operated independently, essentially regional warlords who fought fiercely among themselves. In the first month of 1645, during the critical period of blocking the Qing from crossing the Yellow River, southern Ming general Xu Dingguo in Suizhou colluded with the Qing court. He killed his rival Gao Ji and surrendered with tens of thousands of troops. Gao Ji's army had been the backbone of the Yellow River defense. With his death, the small court suddenly lost its protective barrier in the Shangqiu area of Henan. Shi Kefa immediately advised the court to appoint a new commander for Gao Ji's troops. But Ma Xiying, holding power, feared Shi Kefa's growing influence would threaten his own authority. So he allowed this well-trained army to disband and scatter. Soon after, the Qing crossed the Yellow River. Defending generals Li Chengdam and Lu Liangzu in Shuzhou surrendered one after another. With this shift in power, Qing's strength greatly increased, and the Yellow River defense strategy collapsed. In May 1645, the Qing army reached Yangzhou's walls and sent Shi Kefa a surrender ultimatum. The letter stated, "The southern Ming court lacks legitimacy. The Qing eliminated Li Zicheng, who overthrew the Ming. If you're truly honorable, Shi Kefa, join us. That's real loyalty to the nation. Don't serve a petty court ruled by a foolish emperor and treacherous ministers." Better to prioritize the nation and its people with flexible thinking than chase empty reputations for loyalty. That was their argument. Amid the chaos of 1644, the Qing army's strategy of persuasion became widespread, convincing many Han Chinese forces to surrender. However, Shikefa resolutely refused to surrender, and Yangzhou was eventually captured by the Qing army. The city suffered an extremely brutal massacre, with hundreds of thousands perishing in the disaster. After being captured, Shikefa refused to persuade Jiangnan forces to surrender for the Qing court and was ultimately executed. Yet, he earned respect from both Manchu and Han sides, becoming a model of loyalty for later generations. With Yangzhou fallen and no obstacles north of Nanjing, the capital soon fell. Emperor Hongguan was captured after fleeing. Soon, he was sent to Beijing under house arrest until executed in 1646 for plotting rebellion. Senior southern Ming officials, like Kang Qianyi, led officials and citizens to welcome Qing commanders into the city. Did these surrendering officials feel at ease with their decision? Perhaps the only justification is that this surrender required no personal sacrifice from them. They sacrificed personal integrity to protect the people, sparing Jiangnan from warfare. The most typical example was Qian Qianyi, then Minister of Rights for Southern Ming. Driven by this mindset, he enthusiastically helped the Qing court pacify Jiangnan forces. To this end, he not only provided Prince Yu Dodo, who captured Nanjing, with a recommended list for Jiangnan pacification rules, but also organized surrendered Ming officials to contact local gentry leaders. These officials promised gentry that surrender would ensure local stability, but they had to guarantee public compliance and hand over local taxes. Soon, Jiangnan gentry embraced the Qing court, collaborating with the foreign rulers. Of course, cooperation wasn't smooth. They had the desire to collaborate, but when the Qing overstepped, gentry could turn from collaborators to opponents. So what motivated these gentry? This requires explaining Jiangnan's socioeconomic environment. First, broadly speaking, since the mid-Ming dynasty, Jiangnan developed agricultural commercial economy. Prices for silk and cotton goods rose steadily, shifting many peasant families from grain farming to textile production, making livelihoods increasingly market-dependent. Additionally, land increasingly concentrated in the hands of wealthy landlords. Since gentry enjoyed tax and corvée exemptions, many peasants seeking protection surrendered their land to them, becoming dependents. Below them, tenant farmers, some even sold themselves into slavery to official families. Social polarization was severe, and Jiangnan frequently experienced riots and similar events. Earlier, gentry could resolve class conflicts through charitable relief and paramilitary organizations. But in the late Ming, silver deflation and copper coin devaluation severely damaged the textile industry. Rice prices skyrocketed. Some regions even saw cases of exchanging children for food. With unrest intensifying in Jiangnan and no peace in sight, gentry urgently needed a strong regime to restore stability. Kan Kanyi and others leveraged this to seek cooperation with Jiangnan gentry. Gentry were local elites controlling taxes, civil affairs, and even private militias. Stabilizing the region would naturally let them govern locally afterward. Initially, Qing recruitment succeeded. Gentry leaders in Suzhou, Taikang, etc. proactively submitted, but things quickly reversed. In July 1645, Dorgon issued the Q order, requiring all to shave their heads in Manchu style, leaving only a single braid. This order provoked fierce backlash in Jiangnan. Officials saw it as desecration of Confucian culture. Commoners viewed the shame of head shaving as akin to castration, blatantly so. The Q order violated the cultural dignity of all Han Chinese. Jiangnan gentry and commoners united against Qing rule. In Suzhou, Taikang, Kunshan, etc., gentry led rebellions killing Qing-appointed officials. This wave persisted until late 1645, ending only after Qing forces secured Jiannan's major urban centers. Well, that covers how the Qing army pacified Jiangnan and seized the Nanjing core region. In essence, the Qing's actions boil down to one word: military conquest. Their control of Jiangnan in under a year stemmed from weak opposition, but war alone couldn't secure Qing rule. While armies advanced south, profound internal changes unfolded. Next, I'll discuss how Dorgon's regency consolidated Qing rule through political institutions. After the Qing army entered the Shanhai Pass, Dorgon faced three political challenges. First, how to reconcile Jurchen rulers with Han Chinese officials. Second, how to prevent conflicts among Jurchen nobility. Third, how to avoid factional strife like the late Mings, and what government strategy should Dorgon adopt. Political reforms centered on addressing these issues. The first major initiative was reforming the deliberative council of princes and ministers and the inner court system. The deliberative council, created under Nurhaci, consisted of Manchu nobility serving as imperial advisors. All military and political affairs passed through it. The inner court primarily handled documents, staffed by Manchu and Han grand secretaries who acted as imperial secretaries and advisors. As Qing conquest expanded, administrative demands grew exponentially. Dorgon ordered prioritization. Routine memorials went through 6 ministries, while vital military state affairs reported directly to the inner court, streamlining duties, boosting efficiency, and crucially, elevating the inner court's status. Empowering the inner court and 6 ministries, Dorgon weakened the deliberative council, marginalizing it from power centers into his compliant administrative tool. The second initiative balanced north-south factionalism among officials. During Dorgon's regency, Han factions split into northern and southern cliques. Fang Quan belonged to the northern faction. Chen Mingxia led the southern faction. To balance them, Dorgon supported both leaders to maintain equilibrium. Chen Mingxia became vice minister of personnel, overseeing appointments. Feng Quan, as minister of rights and grand secretary, orchestrated Shanxi's Beijing coronation. But Feng Quan, adopted by notorious eunuch Wei Zhongxian, was a disgraced faction member. In October 1645, 8 ministers impeached Feng Quan for misconduct, demanding execution. Dorgon saw this as resurgent factionalism and warned he wouldn't tolerate it. Thus, Feng Quan kept his position, and factional tensions were temporarily suppressed by Dorgon. A third initiative balanced Manchu-Han official power, creating dual administration. Dorgon cultivated Manchu elites, relying on Brother Dodo for campaigns, infeffing Nurhaci's grandsons as princes for major battles, and appointing bilingual scholars like Ganglin and Qichangge as grand secretaries. He also appointed Han officials to key positions and approved Chen Mingxia proposal to restore the triennial Ming-era official evaluations, banning Manchu officials from mistreating Han counterparts, striving for balance between them. But despite this, Dorgon always harbored some distrust toward Han officials. After all, figures like Han Chengchu and Qian Qianyi gained status under Ming. Could they truly be trusted? They remained uneasy, yet establishing Qing institutions and expanding rule nationwide depended on such men. As a bridge, Dorgon's governance strategies consolidated Qing rule and boosted his prestige. His status became second only to the emperor, unchallenged until 1650. In December, Dorgon died of illness. By February 1651, Emperor Shunxi finally assumed personal rule. To consolidate authority, the 12-year-old Shunxi employed masterful political tactics. His first target was the deceased Dorgon himself. He ordered the deliberative council to report directly to him, relocated the inner court nearer the palace, and personally handled military state affairs. Using amnesties and favors, he won over Manchu nobles purged by Dorgon, allying with them to dismantle Dorgon's faction. A year later, to erase Dorgon's influence, Shunshi urged ministers to investigate his crimes, issuing an edict exposing Dorgon's autocracy. Dorgon's confidants like Ganglin and Kichunge were severely punished. The young emperor now had fully grown wings to pursue his ambitions. During Shunji's personal rule, distinct political trends emerged at court. Next, I'll outline Shunji's key post-regency initiatives, first being establishing a new bureaucratic system. Shunji aimed to make the bureaucracy sufficiently upright and efficient. Soon after assuming power, he dismissed corrupt officials, promoting capable figures like Chen Mingshi, Hong Chengchou, and Chen Zhilin to key roles. Secondly, he honored Ming loyalists who died for the dynasty during its collapse. The significance: to rebuild official morality, encourage loyalty, reverse Ming-era self-serving opportunism, and crucially, purge factions. Emperor Shunzi believed factional strife stemmed from Manchu-Han divisions in court, regional differences, and unchecked local power accumulation. Thus, he accepted a Han minister's proposal to restore the Ming's triennial evaluation system, assessing all under uniform standards. Shunzi saw this as key to balancing North-South Manchu-Han power, combating corruption and factionalism while securing imperial authority. He strengthened the inner court, added grand secretaries, and mandated collective policy-making to prevent any single minister's dominance. He also cultivated personal bonds with grand secretaries. For example, when elderly Grand Secretary Jin Zhizhan repeatedly sought retirement due to age, Shunzi responded, "The sovereign subject bond is eternal. Having received my favor, how could you bear to retire?" This earnest appeal ultimately persuaded Jin Zhizhan to remain. This governing style influenced later emperors Kangxi and Qianlong. Shunxi's second major reform was tax restructuring and canal revitalization. Let's discuss tax reform and canal dredging. First, tax reform. Late Ming warfare caused population displacement and farmland abandonment, rendering inherited records obsolete. In 1648, Qing restored the Ligia system, re-registering households, compiling new registries, and assigning tax quotas. Refugees returned to cultivate wasteland. Registered populations surged by nearly 90 by 1661. Registered land doubled, massively boosting Qing revenue. Simultaneously, he cracked down on gentry tax evasion. Shunzi revised tax exemption privileges for gentry, first granted in 1635 to win Qing's support. But unlimited implementation expanded exemptions, undermining state income. Shunzi imposed strict limits. Exemptions covered only one person's corvée labor, with local officials listing delinquent taxpayers for recovery. Finally, standardizing local finances. Shunxi adopted Minister Wei Shanshu's proposal. Provinces must maintain detailed expenditure records compiled annually for central audit. This makes it easier for the government to audit and account for revenues and expenditures, plus spot which provinces have fiscal strains and allocate resources promptly. After backing local fiscal reforms, next up is tackling water conservancy and canal transport issues. As an agricultural nation, water conservancy is super important. And since the Yuan dynasty, the Grand Canal linking Hangzhou to Beijing has been in place. Every year, tons of supplies head north for military needs and disaster relief. Naturally, Emperor Shunzi couldn't slack off on this. He set up a special official outside the six ministries to manage waterways, called the Director General of River Conservancy, who oversees all canal and water conservancy affairs. With this dedicated setup, massive water projects got fixed up. And by the 18th century, the Yellow River didn't have a major flood for 60 years, hugely benefiting folks nearby. faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally from Talking Books. Today I'm introducing Frederic Wakeman's The Great Enterprise. In the last episode on Qing founding history, I talked about the Qing army capturing Beijing and pacifying the north. Now, I'll cover how the Qing army pacified enemies in the south. First off, let's check out who exactly the Qing army's enemies were. The Qing dynasty's enemies down south were precisely the remnants of the Ming dynasty forces. Beyond those bureaucratic reforms and economic fixes, another key point is Manchu-Han relations during Shenxi's rule. First, Shenxi didn't let Han bureaucrats culturally dominate the court. If Dorgon treated Han ministers with guarded, limited trust, Shenxi definitely ramped that up. One example ties into restoring Ming institutions. To some degree, Emperor Shenxi revamped court structures by copying Ming bureaucratic ways. He even wore Han imperial attire in public, sporting the traditional ceremonial robe and crown. Oh, this outfit was super iconic in the Qin and Han eras. Portraits of Qin Shi Huang and Emperor Wu of Han show him wearing it. Shenxi's moves misled Ming loyalists into thinking the Qing had fully gone Chinese, so some made rash proposals. Back then, official Li Qinshan suggested axing all Manchu officials from Yamens and using only Han ones. So Chen Mingxia also pushed to bring back Ming clothing and customs. No doubt, these ideas were totally impossible to accept. So Li Chengshang got exiled to Shenyang. Chen Mingxia was impeached by rivals on heavy charges, and soon Shenxi ordered him hanged. Later, whenever tricky Manchu-Han relations arose, the Manchu First policy, prioritizing Manchu customs and interests, was established in this era. Secondly, as imperial control expanded, emperors had to grant more key positions to Han ministers, especially early defectors with outstanding merits. For example, Wu Sangui, Gen Jingzhan, and Shan Kexi were infefted as feudatory princes, right? Many provincial governorships were also held by Han bannermen. Among them, only Han feudatory princes like Wu Sangui, commanding regional military power, truly slipped Shenxi's control. Predictably, within decades after Xunzi's death, the revolt of the three feudatories erupted. War engulfed half of China, lasting 8 years before suppression. And Wu Sengui's faction still rallied under Restore Han rule. But this time, most Han sided with the Qing court. We must ask, with the Ming collapse just decades prior, why did loyalty shift to the Qing? 3 main reasons. First, the Qing gave lost intellectuals an outlet. Ming gentry serving the Qing felt awkward, yet letting them retreat uncontrolled was risky. So during Kangxi's reign, understanding Han psychology, the emperor held the eminent scholar exam to select learned, principled men as literary attendants. They also compiled major works like Ming history, but were never granted real office. Thus, the court co-opted these adrift intellectuals, who reciprocated with trust and respect. Second, many literati and surrendered Ming ministers fulfilled reformist ambitions unrealized under Ming, achieving their governance ideals. Tang politics weren't spotless, but suppressing factionalism improved the environment. Officials didn't need factional allegiances, like late Ming, freeing many to showcase talents. Legitimacy-wise, was stubborn loyalty to the Ming necessarily right? Or the Qing championed loyalty and filial piety? These values transcended dynastic cycles, embodying core Confucian ideals. The Qing dynasty adopted the imperial examination system. Even emperors and princes studied the 4 books and 5 classics. Over time, the ruling elite fully mastered this ideology. Yes, the moral burden of loyalty to the Ming dynasty vanished. You could say the Three Feudatories' rebellion became the litmus test for Qing's grand enterprise. By then, Qing controlled Ming's vast territories while securing most Han Chinese loyalty. Amid 17th century global crises, Qing militarily crushed enemies, politically centralized power, and ideologically conquered Han, collaborating without overthrowing Ming institutions to build a vast, culturally splendid empire. This truly merits the great enterprise, but unchallenged dominance sapped Qing's drive for reform and innovation, slowly paralyzing the empire. Ultimately, late 19th century foreign forces blasted open its gates, collapsing this great enterprise. Well, that concludes our interpretation of a great enterprise, the Qing founding history. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.